When I first decided to improve my English, I didn't look for a teacher or buy a giant textbook. Instead, I tried something that felt almost too simple. I surrounded myself with English everywhere I could. At first, it sounded strange. How do you surround yourself with a language if you already live in the United States? I already heard English in stores, on the streets, and at work, but that wasn't enough. I needed intentional immersion. So I started with something very basic. I changed the language on my phone and laptop to English. Suddenly, every setting, every notification, every menu forced me to interact with English words dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day. It felt uncomfortable at first, like walking in new shoes, but after a week, I began recognizing patterns. I wasn't memorizing vocabulary. I was experiencing it. Next, I replaced my background noise with English content. When I cooked breakfast, I played short English podcasts. When I drove to work, I listened to audiobooks. When I relaxed in the evening, I watched YouTube videos, sometimes the news, sometimes comedy, sometimes documentary-style storytelling channels. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to stay interested. The key was this: I never paused a video to look up a word. I let the language flow naturally, exactly the way children learn. And slowly, I noticed progress in the most unexpected ways. One day, while grocery shopping, I caught myself thinking in English about what to buy. Thoughts I had always had in my native language suddenly switched over. It wasn't something I forced. It just happened because my brain started treating English as a daily environment rather than a school subject. Another thing that helped was talking to myself. I know it sounds odd, but it's incredibly effective. While walking to work or cleaning my apartment, I narrated what I was doing in English. I'm picking up the keys. I need to wash these dishes. I should check the weather. It wasn't about speaking beautifully. It was about building automatic habits. And every time I stumbled into a situation where I actually needed to use English with someone else, the words came out more smoothly because I had already practiced them while talking to myself. Then came the part that really changed everything. I found micro moments of immersion during the day. I labeled objects in my home with small sticky notes: mirror, cabinet, remote, charger. It felt like living inside an English bubble. When my eyes landed on any object, the English word appeared instantly in my mind. The repetition worked better than any vocabulary list I had ever tried. Another immersion trick was using English to solve everyday problems. Instead of searching Google in my own language, I typed questions in English. Instead of reading instructions in translation, I read them in English first. Even reading product reviews became a language exercise. I wasn't just learning English, I was living through it. The biggest shift happened when I stopped worrying about mistakes. Immersion works only when you let go of perfection. Children don't think about grammar rules when they learn. They imitate, they absorb, they experiment. I tried to learn the same way. When I made mistakes while talking, I didn't apologize or freeze. I just kept going. Immersion gave me confidence because it trained my brain to treat English as natural, familiar, and comfortable. And that is why immersion became the foundation of everything I learned after. It is simple, it is free, and it works for everyone, no matter your level. If you want your English to stop feeling like homework and start feeling like a part of your everyday life, surround yourself with it every minute you can. When people ask me how long they should study English every day, they usually expect a big number. An hour, maybe 2, maybe more. And they look surprised when I tell them that the most effective learners I've met don't study for long periods at all. Instead, They practice in small, repeatable moments. I call this micro-consistency, and it became the second method that completely transformed the way I learned English. Micro-consistency is simple. Instead of forcing yourself to study for long blocks of time, you practice a little bit every day, even if it's only 5 minutes. It sounds almost too easy, but the magic is in the repetition. Think of it like brushing your teeth. You don't brush for 30 minutes straight once a week. You brush every day for a short time. Language learning works the same way. To make micro-consistency work, I used something I call trigger moments. A trigger moment is an everyday action that reminds you to do a short English exercise. For example, every morning when I made coffee, I listened to a 2-minute English tip video. After lunch, I translated one sentence from my native language into English. Before going to sleep, I read a short English paragraph. These tiny routines added up quickly. What surprised me most was how little discipline I actually needed. Because the actions were small, I didn't feel overwhelmed or guilty if I was tired. The tasks were so quick that skipping them felt harder than doing them. And here's what happened. My brain stayed in constant contact with English without getting exhausted. Another technique I used was micro-reading, which means reading small pieces of English content throughout the day. Instead of trying to finish huge chapters of a book, I read just a few lines. Maybe a news headline, maybe a short social media post, maybe a product description. It didn't matter what the content was. What mattered was that it kept English alive in my routine. The same idea worked with writing. I started writing 5-sentence diary entries each day. Nothing complicated, just what happened, how I felt, what I planned for tomorrow. Over time, these tiny entries created a huge improvement in my grammar and expression. I didn't even notice it happening until one day I looked back at my earlier notes and realized how much simpler and less confident they looked. Micro-consistency also works extremely well with listening practice. I made a habit of keeping short English clips saved on my phone, 30 seconds to 1-minute clips that I could listen to while waiting in line, riding the elevator, or sitting on the bus. At first, I listened just to catch familiar words. Later, I tried repeating the sentences out loud to imitate pronunciation. The more I repeated this routine, the more natural English started to sound. What makes micro-consistency so powerful is that it trains your brain the same way athletes train their muscles. You don't become strong by working out once a week for 4 hours. You become strong by exercising regularly, even if the sessions are short. Your brain responds the same way to language. Short, frequent exposure builds long-term memory faster than long, stressful study sessions. Another advantage is that micro-consistency removes the pressure of perfection. When you know you only need to do 5 minutes, you don't expect yourself to perform flawlessly. You just show up. And showing up every day is the key. Over time, something amazing happens. English becomes a natural part of your daily rhythm. You don't think of learning as a big task anymore. It becomes automatic, just like checking your phone or brushing your teeth. Micro-consistency taught me that progress isn't about how much you study in one session. It's about how often you return to the language. And once you build that habit, English stops being something you learn. It becomes something you live. When I started learning English, I had a very common belief. I thought I needed to know more grammar, more vocabulary, and more proper expressions before I could start speaking. I kept telling myself, I'll speak when I'm ready. But the truth is simple and a little uncomfortable. You never feel ready. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to begin. The third method that changed everything for me was learning to speak before I felt prepared. And if you've ever hesitated to use English out loud, you'll understand exactly why this works so well. The first thing I learned was that speaking is not the result of learning a language. Speaking is the process that makes learning actually stick. When you speak, even if you make 10 mistakes in one sentence, your brain is forced to organize words, recall grammar, and choose expressions in real time. No textbook can teach you that. The moment I accepted this, I made a rule for myself. I had to say something in English every day, even if it was just a few sentences. At first, talking to native speakers was intimidating, so I began with the easiest partner possible, my phone. I recorded short voice messages to myself every day. Simple things like, "Today I feel tired," or "Yesterday I went to the store and bought new shoes." When I listened back, I noticed the mistakes, but instead of feeling embarrassed, I treated them like clues. They helped me discover what grammar I needed to review or what vocabulary I was missing. That self-feedback was incredibly valuable. Another trick that helped me speak earlier was shadowing. Shadowing means listening to a short audio clip and repeating everything the speaker says at the same time. It feels a bit like karaoke, but for English learners. At first, I couldn't keep up. My mouth and my brain refused to cooperate. But after a week of daily shadowing, I started to catch the rhythm of natural English. I wasn't just practicing pronunciation. I was training my tongue and my brain to move together. This technique made me more confident, because even if I didn't understand every word, I felt the flow of English, something textbooks rarely teach. Eventually, I started speaking with real people. But I didn't jump straight into deep conversations. No, that would have been overwhelming. I started with micro-conversations, tiny interactions that lasted less than a minute. Ordering coffee, asking for directions, greeting a neighbor, thanking someone for holding the door. These mini moments gave me real-world speaking practice without pressure. And over time, I noticed something surprising. Native speakers don't care if your English is perfect. They care that you're trying. When I stumbled, people waited patiently. When I used the wrong word, most people understood anyway. When I mispronounced something, they still responded kindly. I realized I had spent years being afraid of something that didn't actually exist: judgment. The only person judging me was me. Another thing that helped was accepting that mistakes aren't failures. They're evidence that you're speaking, learning, and pushing yourself. Every mistake I made became a small victory, because it meant I was actively using the language. And the more mistakes I collected, the faster I improved. I also tried an experiment that turned out to be incredibly effective. I joined online conversation groups where learners from around the world practiced English together. The pressure was lower because everyone was learning, and hearing different accents helped me feel less self-conscious about my own. Little by little, speaking became less of a big scary task and more of a natural habit. The turning point came the day I realized that I had just spoken English for 20 minutes without mentally preparing every sentence. I wasn't translating in my head anymore. I wasn't overthinking. I was simply communicating. And that's what speaking early does. It teaches your brain to trust itself. So if you're waiting until you feel ready to speak English, stop waiting. Speak now. Speak imperfectly. Speak bravely. Speaking early isn't just a method, it's a mindset. And it's one of the most powerful steps you can take toward real, confident English. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started learning English was studying things that had nothing to do with my real life. I memorized vocabulary lists full of words I never used. I learned grammar rules I rarely needed. I read stories that didn't interest me. And because nothing felt connected to my world, nothing stayed in my memory. Everything changed when I discovered the fourth method, learning through personal relevance. This method is simple but incredibly powerful. Focus only on the English that actually matters to you. The human brain is designed to remember information that feels meaningful, emotional, or useful. When something is relevant, it sticks. When it's not, it fades quickly. I began with a small challenge. Every time I learned a new English word, phrase, or sentence, I had to relate it to my own life. For example, instead of trying to memorize the word appointment from a generic list, I practiced using it about my real schedule. I have a dentist appointment on Friday. That sentence meant something to me. It was tied to an actual event, so I never forgot the word again. I started doing this with everything. When I learned the word refund, I used it to talk about the shoes I returned last week. When I learned deadline, I connected it to a project at work. When I learned recipe, I used it to describe a dish I cooked. Suddenly, vocabulary wasn't just a list, it was a part of my life. Another thing that helped was building my English around my hobbies and interests. I love technology, so I listened to English tech reviews, read English articles about new gadgets, and watched explanations about how certain devices work. I wasn't just studying English, I was enjoying my interests in English. And because I cared about the content, I absorbed the language naturally and effortlessly. I also made my practice more personal by turning everyday situations into English opportunities. When I cooked dinner, I explained the steps to myself in English. When I planned my day, I wrote my to-do list in English. When I exercised, I followed English fitness videos. Each activity reinforced specific words and expressions connected to real actions. I didn't feel like I was studying. I felt like I was using the language to navigate my life. Another important part of personal relevance is emotional connection. The words we remember best are the ones tied to feelings, surprise, frustration, joy, excitement. So whenever something happened, good or bad, I described it in English. If I was stuck in traffic, I said, "This is so frustrating." If I was excited about the weekend, I said, "I can't wait." These small emotional statements made the language feel alive. What I realized over time was that personal relevance eliminates the biggest problem in language learning: boredom. When you only learn things that matter, motivation becomes automatic. You don't need willpower, you're simply interested. And when your brain is engaged, it learns faster, deeper, and more naturally. By focusing on English that was truly connected to my world, I stopped feeling like a student and started feeling like a real English user. That mental shift changed everything. Learning became enjoyable. Progress became steady. And English became a practical tool, not just an academic subject. The final method that changed the way I learned English wasn't about vocabulary, grammar, or speaking. It was about something deeper, building a system that carried me forward even on the days when I didn't feel motivated at all. Most people believe motivation is the key to learning a language. They wait for the right mood, the right moment, or a burst of inspiration. But motivation is unpredictable. Some days you have it, some days you don't. Relying on it is like trying to build a house on soft sand. What actually creates long-lasting progress is a simple, repeatable system, a structure that supports you even when you feel tired, stressed, or busy. The first part of my system was creating a predictable routine. I chose 3 anchor moments each day: morning, afternoon, and evening. In each moment, I did one small English activity. Nothing overwhelming. A short podcast in the morning, a quick speaking practice in the afternoon, and a little reading before sleep. Because the routine was consistent, it became automatic. I didn't think, "Do I feel like studying?" I simply followed the system. Another part of my system was tracking small wins. I kept a simple notebook where I wrote down what I practiced each day. Not detailed notes, just a sentence, listen to podcast, read one page, spoke for 5 minutes. Seeing streaks of progress made me want to continue. Even on days when the practice felt minimal, the record reminded me that progress isn't about perfection. It's about consistency over time. I also built my system to be flexible. I didn't force myself to use the same resources every day. If I got bored with one podcast, I switched to another. If reading felt too heavy, I watched a YouTube video. The system wasn't about doing the same thing. It was about showing up for English in some form. The freedom kept me engaged without breaking the habit. One of the most powerful elements of my system was accountability. I told a friend about my English goals and checked in with them every week. Sometimes we practiced together, sometimes we just talked about what I learned. Having someone who expected me to keep going made the system stronger. Over time, something shifted. English stopped feeling like a project and started feeling like a natural part of my identity. I didn't worry about losing motivation because the system took care of the momentum. That's the beauty of building a system. It makes learning sustainable. Motivation may start your journey, but a system keeps you moving until English becomes a permanent part of your life.